why would you treat it as a game? And it's not that I think we are intentionally treating it as a game, but the way it's built and the way we react with things have made it kind of like a game.
No, I am your father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and happy Valentine's Day, and welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Valentine's Day with your significant others or by yourself if you're like me and sadly single. But anyways, today we are having kind of an interesting topic because, so as you know, this podcast is about entertainment and things that I personally find entertaining. So this is less conventional entertainment because I'm going to be talking about dating and particularly dating apps because I find the whole concept of dating apps, having been on a few of them, and I am on a few of them, I find them to be particularly kind of entertaining. They're kind of funny because realistically, dating apps, they are more socially acceptable now. I think everyone kind of understands that most people use dating apps nowadays, which is kind of weird because it's not as conventional as it used to be, where you would ask people in person if they were interested in you, or you would be like, hey, I like you. Do you want to go out? And that still does happen for sure, but I definitely think people have way more adapted to the online format of dating. So now we have like dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, OkCupid, Match.com. There's a crap ton of them that people are kind of just used to the idea of online dating. And I've had some successes and I've had some bad parts to online dating, but I think the whole general concept people have definitely gotten a bit more comfortable with, but it's still almost kind of feels weird. Like sometimes, especially telling your parents or family members that didn't really have online dating, you feel a little bit embarrassed to talk about it and be like, yeah, so we met on Tinder. Just because, I don't know, I think people just kind of have this stigma about online being a really weird place, and it is, and it can be kind of dangerous, and you have to definitely be careful being online and dating. However, I think it's definitely not as embarrassing now. At least it shouldn't be, because so many people are doing it, and it's just the way it is now. It's how people kind of meet and connect, and it doesn't always work out, but it's kind of the way it is. And I think it's been especially pushed the last couple of years due to the pandemic, because you couldn't go out and meet people. You couldn't really go to a bar or a party because there was too many people and you could accidentally get COVID. And so people were kind of forced online, and that caused them to have to adapt really quickly to this if they didn't exactly want to be lonely, or if they just didn't have ways of meeting people through friends. I think that usually kind of correlates with the similar thing. Not everyone has friends that also have friends that they would get set up with. And so social media dating sort of has kind of grown in popularity in the past couple of years, especially. But so I do find the whole thing to be particularly entertaining because I find that dating apps kind of are a game in a way. And I know that feels kind of weird and almost like, I think superficial would be the right word for it. Like it makes the whole experience, it makes it almost feel like irrelevant, because you're like, well, you're on there for dating. Why are you treating it like a game? But even people who are on there for serious reasons, they want to have a long-term relationship and they want to develop something and match with someone that they could maybe have a long-term relationship and maybe even get married. Because that can definitely happen. Why would you treat it as a game? And it's not that I think we are intentionally treating it as a game, but the way it's built and the way we react with things have made it kind of like a game. Because typically with dating apps, you swipe left or right. Left means you don't like them, right means you do. That's usually the case for most dating apps. Hinge, I know, doesn't really have the swipe, but it's still like a like or dislike feature, and I think they are on left and right sides. So, excuse me. I think it's definitely become a game. It's like, ooh, I could go right and I have a possibility of winning a match, or I could go X and get them off the player board, and I get more points if I X these kinds of people than if I like these kinds of people. And then it kind of builds this progressive game. It's almost like gambling, really, because you're taking a chance on everything. It's not a guarantee. And sometimes things do work out that way, and you're like, oh, I really hope I match with this person. And then you end up matching with them, but then it doesn't go anywhere else. And so it kind of makes the whole thing, it's like a game of chance. You're playing the game. You're like, oh, this could end up in a match, or it could not. And you're kind of just playing your chances. And so I think in that aspect, it definitely feels kind of weird, and like, it feels like a game because your subconscious is treating it that way. I think you can definitely use dating apps way more consciously and think about who you are liking and disliking, rather than just kind of mindlessly swiping on people. I know I try and do that, but I definitely have my days where I'm like, oh yeah, I like all these people. And then I match with them later and I'm like, why did I swipe on this person? It's not that they're like unattractive or that kind of thing, but it's like, it just doesn't match. The interests aren't there, or the natural chemistry just is not connecting, because that's a big thing. If you're not having very natural chemistry, talking with each other, a lot of times I feel like it doesn't work out, at least for me anyways, because if like the conversation gets really dry really quickly, then I think it becomes less incentive to continue talking with that person. And then it's like, okay, let's keep playing the game and let's get another win and see what this one does. And so I feel like that kind of plays into that game aspect especially. But I think being more conscious about it is definitely helpful. You got to check their bio and their interests, and maybe you look closer at their photos. They're like, are you actually attracted to this person, or are you just kind of in the heat of the moment? You're like, oh, I could go for anybody really. Because I think anybody can kind of feel that way at times. I feel like hookup culture has kind of developed that for a lot of us. And I personally think hookup culture kind of sucks. Because I get it. It's like just mindless fun. However, I think it's better if you have at least somewhat of a connection, even if it's like a friend connection. That's going to be better than just nothing at all. And so, I mean, that's at least the way I feel about it. And so being a bit more mindful with the kind of people you're choosing, which I think is how people are in real life. I think being online, you sort of lower your standards sometimes because you're kind of just playing the game and you're wanting a match more quickly and like you want more of them, you want them faster rather than taking your time and getting more substantial matches. Because I feel like in real life, that's exactly what we're doing. It's not going up to every random person we see that we're attracted to. Like, I'm not going up to every woman that I find even remotely attractive and being like, hey, here's my number. Let's go out sometime. I'm not going to lie, that would be impressive to have that kind of confidence, but I don't feel like that's how it is in real life. We typically analyze the situation a little bit more. You're like, okay, I like how this person looks, because, gonna be honest, I think most people, and this sounds shallow, we are drawn in by looks first. They say don't judge a book by its cover, and they're right, because usually contents can be way more revealing. However, covers, or attraction in this case, usually grabs our attention first. It's what gets us interested. It grabs our eyeballs and it's like, hey, look at this. You may want this more. And so then after the initial attraction, you're like, okay, maybe this could be a potential partner. So you start talking to them. And if the conversation goes really good and you feel like you have natural chemistry and stuff with them, maybe you ask them out and you see how a more romantic relationship plays out, and maybe it doesn't work out that way and it ends up just being a friends thing, and that's okay too, because sometimes that's just how it is. It doesn't always work out, because you may not match on certain things romantically, but you could match on a lot of things just being friends, or the conversation initially goes really bad, or you realize there is nothing there, it was just the attraction. Then you're like, okay, I'm kind of good not being with this person, and that's okay. That's part of the dating process. You kind of have to just analyze and learn through it a bit more. And I definitely think dating apps can be that way. However, I think it's harder to do it that way, because you have this disconnect through the internet. And I love the internet. Clearly, I am making a podcast. I do social media. I do all kinds of stuff. And so I understand it. But there is a disconnect, because you have the internet is essentially this middleman, because you're on one side, the person you like or don't, whatever, is on the other side. And so you kind of have to go through this barrier to actually try and get to know each other rather than being in person. And for some people, that actually works out really well. I feel like introverts in particular have, not always, but they feel more comfortable on dating apps, because they do have that disconnect, and it gives them time to think about their responses and how they want to continue with this conversation. Because typically with like texting and stuff, there's definitely more of a delay. You're not getting an instant response as you would with regular conversation. And so I feel like introverts can kind of get over some of their awkwardness with them being able to have some time to think and then respond to people on dating apps. But also it doesn't work that way for everybody. I'm kind of a mix of both, and I have both sides. 'Cause sometimes I feel like the conversation is so bad on social media. I'm going to say social media over and over. Just know I'm meaning dating apps, because it's basically a social media. So it's terrible on there, and then you meet in real life, and it actually goes way better because you can just play off each other a lot easier, and it's quicker rather than trying to overthink everything. But then you can also have the exact opposite, where it's really good on text, and then you get to real life, and then it's actually garbage. I've had those ones too. And so it makes the whole thing kind of interesting, because it can go so many different ways, but you're not having a natural conversation really. Even if whether it's good or bad, you're usually thinking about things more when you can text them, because it just takes longer to do that, and you cannot reply and have longer to think, or you end up ghosting them by accident. So it kind of just works out that way, rather than having the natural progression of a conversation in real life. Because usually in real life, you have to get over like the really awkwardness in the initial stage, and then it kind of gets better as it goes along. I think, what is the theory behind that? I think it's uncertainty. Because I'm a communications major, I understand how communication works. I even had a theory class about it, and I believe it was uncertainty, like the uncertainty reduction, I think, is the theory. So it essentially means that the more time you spend with people, the more comfortable you end up becoming. So like the more you talk with someone, you get more and more comfortable, which I think is definitely the case. Usually it's really hard to get it started, and then you can kind of start picking up, and then it kind of exponentially, there we go, grows, and you become way more comfortable, and then you can start sharing things that are way more personal rather than just the surface level stuff like, hey, what's your favorite color? What do you like to eat? I don't know, what's your favorite movie? And it's like the basic stuff. And I think you can still have that even in deeper conversations, but as you go through it more, you have deeper responses. You get more personal, and you take the time to actually give a thought out response instead of a 1 or 2 word response. And so I think social media can kind of prohibit that a little bit, not entirely, but a slight bit, just because of that disconnect, not being able to pick up on facial and body cues, and being able to understand the tone of their voice and inflection and different things like that, that can alter how you continue with a conversation. You can sometimes get the gist of it when you're texting online. However, that's not always the case. And so I think that's where dating apps kind of lack a little bit, because they just don't have that same social cue status. Does that make sense? I think so. You just don't get that same kind of stuff when you are doing things online rather than in person. But so it makes the whole thing kind of interesting. And I think my experience with not social media, I keep saying that, dating apps, get it in your brain, Bryson. It's dating apps that we're talking about. But I have a pretty interesting experience, particularly on Tinder, because my Tinder account is not technically me. It is and it isn't at the same time, because my Tinder account, hilariously, is just of me as Spider-Man. The name is Spider-Man. I list the job as superhero for Avengers. I do have my school actually on there. And then it's like I have a corny bio that's like, my ex forgot about me, so now I'm here to find someone else to wrap in my web of love. It's so corny, but, you know, it's kind of entertaining. And then all the pictures I have are just of me in the mask as Spider-Man. So it creates this very unique dynamic, because it's kind of almost a satirical account. I do sometimes treat it like legit, and I'm like, yeah, I actually do look for real things on here, but a lot of the times it is sort of a joke on Tinder. But I think Tinder is definitely the biggest dating app for sure. I think you have, even in like small towns like mine, I think, especially in small towns that I'm in, you have a much better chance because everyone knows about Tinder. Not everyone knows about Bumble or Hinge, but I think it's almost universally understood what Tinder is at this point, especially if you're an adult, because you have to be an adult to be on there, but it just means you kind of understand it a little bit better. And so with me having that kind of account, it makes for more interesting experiences because it plays into that game aspect a lot that I was talking about earlier, because you're not knowing the people that swipe on it could be swiping on it for several different reasons. So it's like picking pathways in a game. Am I swiping on Spider-Man because I want to just know who he is? Am I swiping on Spider-Man because I want to go on a date with Spider-Man? Do I want to be friends with Spider-Man? Do I want to just see what this is about? Whatever. So it kind of makes the whole thing like amplified in that game aspect, because now it just flips it. Because typically what happens, if you're a guy, I think you definitely understand this. Sorry, I'm adjusting the pillow on my chair because it is moving around and being weird. I'm just going to put that away. But so typically if you're a guy on Tinder, your experience is usually quite a bit different than a woman on Tinder. And I'm using just man and woman instead of just, I mean, I could say male presenting and female presenting. I think that would probably work. Yeah. So if you're presenting as a man or if you're presenting as a woman, or any mix in between, typically you have completely different experiences from the opposite. Men typically, from what I found, get less matches, and usually less likes for sure. And then women usually get a lot, but they're way more picky about their matches, which I think is understandable. And women tend to get way weirder messages than men, for sure. And I have experienced this sort of through my Spider-Man account, just because I have occasionally, just for fun, to see how it is, because I want to know like almost the percentage of men versus women who are wanting Spider-Man. It's hilarious. I feel like I usually get a lot more likes when I switch preferences to all, because then I get all the men attached, which is hilarious. Because I'm not part of the queer community, but I just find it interesting to like switch those on. And I always say, usually I'm like, hey, if you're a guy, I'm just looking for friends on that aspect, because I'm not trying to queer bait them or anything, because I think that would be wrong to try and lead them on. But it becomes very interesting because I start getting messages, because even though they know I'm looking for friends, you get way weirder messages, which is kind of what females get. I said females. I feel so cringe for saying it that way. It's what women get. Because usually men are animals. They're looking, I think on Tinder especially, they're usually looking for benefits or just hookups. Sometimes it is relationships. I have several friends that they're looking for relationships on that kind of stuff too. But I feel like the majority of men use Tinder specifically because they're kind of hoping for sex and those kind of benefits. And I don't usually look for that kind of stuff. I do find it funny to send like pickup lines that say sort of things like that, but I'm usually never very serious about it. And so it just becomes like a hellscape that I'm looking at when I switch the preferences. And then I kind of realize what women have to go through in the dating world, because you get catcalled and said crazy things too, and kind of get objectified, which is a little strange. But yeah. And then anyways, sorry, I like had a thought and then blanked. But so dating apps are just kind of interesting, and I think there's a lot of different kind of stigma around them for like women, because they can get weird messages, and then they can also way more easily, I say easily, it's not like it's necessarily easy, but they get targeted more, usually by predators or scam accounts. So they are usually having to be a lot more cautious, which I think is why they can usually be more picky. Because I think women are definitely more picky in real life too. I don't know. I'm not saying like, I don't know. I've kind of dug myself into a hole here. Everyone can be picky with who they date. I think women typically have to make a more conscious effort into being cautious about who they date, because people can be weirdos and predators and bad people. And so, like, you can have men being targeted by that kind of stuff too. However, it's harder to do that for men, which is really kind of messed up that the world is that way, because everyone should be treated equally and we should not be preying on other people, because what the heck? Just treat everybody nicely and don't expect to be getting things out of it, i.e. nice guys, which is kind of where like the Tinder thing kind of falls in, because a lot of men are just looking for like sex and benefits and stuff like that. And then you're like, but why? You don't need to be doing that. And so it just kind of makes dating apps kind of entertaining, because even when people are taking it seriously, you realize it's being done kind of like a game. And the people who made the app definitely know that. You basically, like the way their algorithm works, it's definitely like a game. If you get likes, your score goes up. If you get dislikes, I think your score goes down. If you like certain people, your score can actually stay the same, or it can actually go down. Or if you dislike people that have a lot of likes, your score can go up. And there's a whole like mess and jumble of how that all works. And I still don't understand how all of it works. And I feel like I've been on dating apps a lot. I've had some good relationships come out of dating apps, but I also think they're just kind of by chance sometimes. And so it makes the whole thing kind of entertaining, and you're like, ooh, I want to play the game of dating. And it makes it kind of fun and then kind of depressing at the same time, because you're like, this isn't exactly what I want from dating. I want more serious relationships. Even if they're more short term, you want to be more like invested in them. And dating apps don't always typically lead to that, which is okay, because I think that's kind of just how it is. But it's also kind of hard to meet people in the real world sometimes, and especially if you're a bit more socially awkward or introverted. I think I'm definitely a bit more that way in real life. Like I will see people that I'm like, man, they're attractive, but I will not have the confidence to go up and be like, hey, you're attractive. Do you want to go out sometime? Just because I do not have that kind of self-confidence. I do have self-confidence, but it is never when I am romantically involved. I feel like I start having romantic feelings and I'm like, oh, I'm so awkward. I have no self-worth. And not like that. That's way extreme. But I get like way more like self-conscious about everything. And then whenever I'm single, I'm like, yeah, I'm the best dude in the world. And so it kind of just makes everything interesting. And the dating world is just kind of interesting in general. It is great when it does work out. However, there is a lot of times where I feel like it doesn't, and people get a little dejected by that. And so, is that the right term? Dejected? I think so. It's not rejected. I think it's dejected. That would probably be right. They're down on their luck. I think that's the better way to say that. I'm always questioning myself through half the stuff I say, but that's okay. But so I think it's just really interesting in the way dating is kind of perceived, and it's definitely evolved over the years, because I feel like back in the 40s, it's like men who are always making the first moves, and they're like, hey baby, let's go out, da, 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 da. And you're like, cool dude. And then nowadays it's like way more like 50-50. I think either side can make the first move, and then it just becomes very interesting. And then you have the actual process of dating, going through like the talking stage, and then you're like, oh, I actually want a relationship, or maybe you make it official, or it's just like a situationship and you don't even know. It kind of just goes everywhere. And so it's kind of a whole process in of itself, and it's kind of a game even just with real life dating. Just once you actually get to that stage of being like, okay, so we're talking and now we're kind of like friends, and now we could be friends with benefits, or we could even pursue like a relationship or a marriage or a life partner. What are we doing? And so it kind of just goes every which where, which kind of is hard to get through sometimes. I feel like my relationships have never lasted. The longest, I've had one where it lasted a little over a year. That was a good one. But I feel like most of my relationships, they fizzle out in that first honeymoon phase, which is usually like 3 months. Which typically, if you're really in love with someone and you're very attracted to them and you have a good connection, that stage will never really end. However, it becomes like a more routine, I think. I don't know. I'm not exactly the best expert because I have not been in enough super long-term relationships. So, take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But yeah, I just find dating and dating apps to be kind of entertaining. Even when you're treating them a bit seriously, they're kind of just like a game. And that's okay. You can treat it however you want, whether you're looking for something serious or if you just want friends or new acquaintances and people to talk to. That's okay. It's all a journey, and we're all treating everything a little bit differently. And so with that, that's kind of where I'm going to end today. I hope you have a happy Valentine's Day, whether you're with a significant other or by yourself. If you're by yourself, treat yourself. Go to a movie, make yourself, or go buy dinner. And just kind of relax and give yourself some self-love. And if you're with a significant other, give your partner and still yourself some self-love, because love all around. It's the day of love. I still kind of think Valentine's Day is a little crazy. We'll talk about that on another episode sometime. But until then, I hope you had a great time, and I'll see all you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to Easily Entertained with me, your host, Bryson. If you enjoyed, be sure to tune back in Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time to hear all about the latest in entertainment. And if you want more, be sure to check us out on social media, on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and we can get even more latest on entertainment. The podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.